My name is Khalid Al-Dusari, and I am telling you today that Jesus is the only source of my wealth, not Allah, not my ability.
My name is Khalid Al-Dusarim, once the richest man recognized in Saudi Arabia. That was me in my private aircraft after I had a miraculous encounter with Jesus. He dealt with me in an unbelievable way, and I decided to give a full account of my conversion, which, as expected, has shaken the Muslim world. Let me begin from the beginning. Every boy who grows up in Jeddah learns two things before he learns anything else. The first is that Allah is great. The second is that money is power. I learned both of these lessons in my father's house on a quiet street in the Al-Hamra district of Jeddah, where the smell of the Red Sea mixed with the smell of outburning in every room. My father, Abdul Rahman Al-Dusari, was a merchant, not the kind of merchant who sits in a gold souk selling chains to tourists, a real merchant. The kind who wakes up at 4 in the morning and drives to the port at Jeddah Islamic port to inspect shipping containers full of electronics and textiles and building materials coming in from China and India and Turkey. He built his import business from nothing, starting with a single warehouse near the Al-Balad district in the old city center. By the time I was born in 1971, he owned 7 warehouses and had contracts with construction companies across the western province of Saudi Arabia. I was born in Jeddah in the summer of 1971 during the reign of King Faisal. My mother, Naura, came from a respected family in Medina. Her father was an imam at a mosque near the Prophet's mosque. Her family traced their lineage back several generations of Islamic scholars, and her marriage to my father was considered a union of commerce and religion, money and God. In Saudi Arabia, those two things have always walked hand in hand. My mother made sure I understood from the earliest age that everything we had came from Allah. Every riyal in my father's bank account, every container that arrived safely at the port, every contract that was signed, it was all from Allah. And the way to keep Allah's blessings flowing was to obey Him completely. Pray 5 times a day, fast during Ramadan, give zakat, memorize the Quran, never question the sheikhs, never doubt the faith. I was enrolled in the Quran memorization school when I was 5 years old. Every morning before regular school, I would sit cross-legged on the floor of a small mosque in the Al-Sharafiyah district with 20 other boys reciting verses in Arabic until they were burned into my memory. So our teacher, Sheikh Turki, was a thin man with a long beard and hard eyes who carried a wooden stick that he used freely on any boy who stumbled over a word or lost his place. I memorized the entire Quran by the time I was 12, all 114 surahs. I could recite them forward and backward without a single mistake. Sheikh Turki told my father I was gifted. He said Allah had blessed me with a sharp mind and that I should consider studying at the Islamic University of Medina to become a scholar. But my father had other plans. He wanted me in the business. He said scholars earned respect, but merchants earned respect and money. And in Saudi Arabia, money was the language everyone understood. By the time I was 16, I was working alongside my father at the port every day after school. I learned how to negotiate with suppliers from Guangzhou and Mumbai. I learned how to read shipping manifests and customs documents. I learned how to calculate profit margins in my head faster than most men could do on a calculator. My father taught me that business was not about selling products. It was about selling trust. He said, if people trust your name, they will buy anything you offer. And in Saudi Arabia, family name was everything. The Al-Dusari name was not royal. We were not princes. We were not from the Saud family or the major tribal dynasties that controlled the country. But we were known for honesty, known for delivering on time, known for paying our debts. And that reputation was worth more than any royal title. I watched my father build relationships with some of the most powerful men in the kingdom. He drank coffee with governors and deputy ministers and military commanders. He shook hands with men who could make a phone call and move mountains. And I learned that in Saudi Arabia, power was not just political, it was financial. The men who controlled the money controlled everything. I took over my father's business when I was 24 years old after he suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. He spent his remaining years in a wheelchair in our family home, watching me from the window as I drove to the port every morning in the same car he used to drive. I was determined to make him proud. I was determined to take what he had built and multiply it 100 times. And I did. Within 5 years, I had expanded the import business into construction material supply. Saudi Arabia in the late 1990s was building everything: the shopping malls, hospitals, office towers, housing complexes. The kingdom was pouring billions of riyals into infrastructure, and I positioned our company to supply the raw materials: steel, cement, glass, marble, timber. If it went into a building, I supplied it. I opened offices in Riyadh and Dammam and Al Khobar. I hired hundreds of employees. I signed contracts worth tens of millions of riyals with some of the biggest construction firms in the Gulf. By the time I was 35, I was worth over 2 billion riyals. I own properties across Jeddah, including a villa in the Ubhur district overlooking the Red Sea that had its own private beach. I owned a fleet of luxury cars. I traveled first class to London and Geneva and Hong Kong. I wore custom-made thobes and Italian shoes and a watch on my wrist that cost more than most Saudi families earned in 10 years. I was living the dream that every boy in Jeddah fantasized about, the dream of unlimited wealth, the dream of power and prestige and influence, and I believed with every fiber of my being that all of it came from Allah, that my success was proof of His favor, that my bank account was a measure of my righteousness. Every Friday I prayed at the Grand Mosque. Every Ramadan I fasted and gave millions in charity. Every year I performed Umrah, walking around the Kaaba in Mecca, thanking Allah for His generosity. I was the perfect Muslim businessman, rich, devout, generous, respected, and I was absolutely certain that Allah loved me because He had given me more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But there was something underneath all the gold and marble and luxury that I never talked about. Something I hid from everyone, including myself. A feeling that crept into my chest late at night when the house was quiet and the servants had gone to bed, and I sat alone in my massive living room, surrounded by furniture that cost more than most people's homes. It was a feeling of absolute emptiness, like standing in the middle of a palace and realizing that every room is hollow. Every wall is just decoration. Every door opens into nothing. I had everything the world said would make a man happy, and I was miserable. I had 3 marriages. The first ended after 4 years because my wife said I loved money more than I loved her. She was right. The second ended because I was never home, always traveling, always chasing the next deal, thus always on the phone. My second wife told me the day she left that she had been married to a ghost, a man who existed only in bank statements and business contracts. I married a third time, hoping it would be different, but it was not. Money had become my oxygen. I could not breathe without it. I could not think about anything else. And every relationship I touched turned to dust because I gave everything to the business and had nothing left for the people who needed me. I had 5 children from my 3 marriages, and I barely knew any of them. My eldest son, Omar, from my first marriage, grew up calling our driver uncle more often than he called me father. My daughters from my second marriage lived with their mother in a compound in Riyadh, and I saw them maybe twice a year during Eid. I told myself I was building an empire for them. I told myself everything I did was for their future, but the truth was I was building an empire for myself, for my ego, for the thrill of watching numbers grow on a screen, for the rush of closing a deal and knowing I had won. I was addicted to wealth the way some men are addicted to drugs, and like any addiction, it demanded more and more while giving back less and less. I would close 100 million real deal and feel a moment of satisfaction that lasted maybe an hour. Then the emptiness would return, deeper than before, hungrier than before, demanding the next deal, the next contract, the next zero added to my net worth. I was running on a treadmill made of gold, and I could not stop, because stopping meant facing the hollow man underneath the expensive thobe. At night, I would sometimes stand on the balcony of my villa in Obor, looking out at the Red Sea, and ask myself a question I was afraid to answer. Is this all there is? I had money, I had power, I had influence, I had everything Islam told me was a sign of Allah's favor. But I felt nothing when I prayed. I felt nothing when I fasted. I felt nothing when I walked around the Kaaba, surrounded by millions of pilgrims, all crying out to Allah. I was performing the motions of faith the way I performed the motions of business, efficiently, perfectly, without a single drop of genuine feeling. And somewhere in the back of my mind, in a place I was terrified to look, a thought was forming that I could not silence no matter how much money I threw on top of it. What if all of this means nothing? What if I built my kingdom on sand, and when the wind comes it will all blow away and leave me standing with nothing but dust in my hands? The wind came, and it did not just blow. It tore through my life like a storm, ripping the roof of a house and exposing everything underneath to the burning sun. It started on a Thursday evening in October 2015. I was in my office on the 23rd floor of a commercial tower on Talia Street in Jeddah, reviewing contracts for a new project in the King Abdullah Economic City, when my phone rang. It was my first wife, Hanan. She never called me. We had not spoken directly in years. Everything between us went through lawyers. But she was calling now, and her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand what she was saying. She said, Omar. She said accident. She said Jeddah, Makkah highway. And then she said the word that split my life into before and after. Gone. My son Omar was 22 years old. He had been driving back from Makkah after visiting a friend. His car hit a barrier on the highway near the Al Haramain junction and flipped 3 times. He died before the ambulance arrived. I do not remember leaving my office. I do not remember driving to the hospital. I do not remember anything except standing in a cold white room in the King Fahd Hospital, looking down at my son's body covered in a white sheet. His face was untouched. He looked like he was sleeping. I reached out and touched his cheek, and it was cold. That coldness traveled from my fingertips through my entire body and settled in my chest, where it stayed for months. I had built an empire worth billions of reals, and I could not buy my son 5 more minutes of life. I could not negotiate with death. I could not sign a contract that would bring him back. All the money in all the banks in all of Saudi Arabia was worthless in that room. I stood there staring at his face, and for the first time in my life, I understood what true poverty felt like. Not the absence of money, the absence of power over the things that truly matter. We buried Omar the next day in the Al-Harazat cemetery in Jeddah according to Islamic tradition, wrapped in white cloth, no coffin, lowered into the ground facing Makkah. The Imam recited prayers. My brothers and cousins stood around the grave with somber faces. The people came to the house for 3 days of mourning, sitting on the floor, drinking bitter coffee, saying, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi rajoon. To Allah we belong and to Allah we return. Everyone said the same words. Everyone quoted the same verses. Everyone told me to be patient, that Omar was in a better place, that this was Allah's will and I must accept it. But none of those words reached the place inside me that was bleeding. They bounced off me like pebbles thrown against a concrete wall. I nodded and thanked people and played the role of the strong, grieving father. But inside, I was drowning. Inside, I was screaming at a God who had taken my son and left me with nothing but a hole in my chest that no amount of prayer could fill. 3 months after Omar's death, my second wife, Lama, tried to kill herself. She swallowed an entire bottle of sleeping pills in her apartment in Riyadh. Her housekeeper found her unconscious on the bathroom floor and called an ambulance. She survived, but spent 2 weeks in the hospital and was transferred to a psychiatric facility in the Al Yasmin district. When I flew to Riyadh to see her, she looked at me from her hospital bed with hollow eyes and said, "You did this to me. You left me alone for years. You gave me money instead of love. You gave me a credit card instead of your time. And now our daughters are growing up the same way I lived, alone in a big house with everything except a father." I stood beside her bed and could not argue because every word she said was true. I had traded my family for my fortune. I had sacrificed the people who loved me on the altar of my ambition. And now the bill was coming due and the price was more than I could bear. 6 months after Lama's suicide attempt, I discovered that my business partner and closest friend, Faisal Al-Qatani, had been stealing from me. Faisal and I had worked together for 15 years. He managed our real estate division, which controlled properties worth over 800 million riyals across Jeddah and Riyadh. I trusted him completely. He ate dinner at my home. He knew my children. He called me brother. But an internal audit revealed that Faisal had been siphoning funds through shell companies registered in Bahrain and the UAE. Over 7 years, he had stolen approximately 350 million riyals. When I confronted him in my office, he did not deny it. He sat across from me and smiled and said, "Khalid, you have so much you did not even notice." He said it like he was doing me a favor, like taking from a rich man was not really stealing. I fired him immediately and pursued legal action, but the betrayal cut deeper than the money. This was the man I had trusted more than my own brothers, the man I had built half my empire with. And he had been robbing me blind while shaking my hand and calling me brother every single day for 7 years. Trust. The very thing my father told me was the foundation of business. Shattered. In the space of 1 year, I had lost my son, nearly lost my ex-wife, and been betrayed by the person I trusted most in the world. I was a man standing in the ruins of everything he had built, and I did not know how to rebuild. So I turned to the only thing I had been taught to turn to in times of crisis: Islam. I increased my prayers from 5 times a day to 8. I added voluntary prayers in the middle of the night. Tahajjud prayers where I would wake at 2 in the morning and prostrate on my prayer rug, begging Allah to ease my pain. I performed Umrah 4 times in 3 months, walking around the Kaaba with tears streaming down my face, asking Allah to speak to me, to tell me why, to give me some reason for the suffering, to show me that He was there, that He cared, that my son's death had meaning, that my broken family had purpose, that my pain was not random cruelty from an indifferent universe. I donated massive amounts of money to charity. I funded the construction of a mosque in Jeddah near the Al Samir district. I paid for water wells to be dug in villages in Sudan and Bangladesh. I sponsored hundreds of orphans through Islamic relief organizations. I gave and gave and gave, thinking that maybe if I was generous enough, Allah would notice me. Maybe if I emptied my wallet far enough, He would fill my heart. But nothing changed. The emptiness remained. The pain remained. The silence from heaven remained. I was pouring money into a hole that had no bottom. I consulted the most respected sheikhs I could find. I traveled to Riyadh to meet with a famous scholar who had studied at the Islamic University of Medina and was known for his wisdom in matters of faith and suffering. I sat in his majlis surrounded by his students and asked him why Allah was silent, why I could not feel His presence despite doing everything Islam required and more. The sheikh looked at me with calm eyes and said, "Brother Khalid, this is a test. Allah tests those He loves. The greater the test, the greater the reward. Be patient, continue your prayers, continue your charity. Allah will reward you in the afterlife." I left his house feeling emptier than when I arrived. He had given me the same answer everyone else gave. Wait, be patient. The reward is coming later, always in the afterlife. Never now, never here, never in this moment when I am bleeding and broken and desperate for a single word from the God I have served my entire life. I drove back to Jeddah that night along the Haramain highway, the same highway where my son had died. I pulled over near the same junction where his car had flipped. I got out and stood on the shoulder of the road in the darkness with trucks and cars flying past me at 160 kilometers per hour. I looked up at the sky and I said out loud in Arabic with no one to hear me except God if He was listening, "I have given you everything, my money, my obedience, my prayers, my son. What more do you want from me? What do I have to do to hear your voice just once? Tell me who you are, because the God I have been worshipping for 50 years has never once spoken back to me." The highway roared with traffic. The wind blew sand across my face, and the sky was silent. I got back in my car and drove home in the darkness, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. I had reached the end of everything I knew, every resource, every strategy, every religious tool I had been given since childhood. All of it was exhausted, and I was still empty, still broken, still standing in a palace made of gold with absolutely nothing inside it that mattered. What happened next was something I never planned and never expected. It did not come through a mosque or a sheikh or a religious book. It came through a man who earned less in a year than I spent on a single dinner. A man whose name I did not even know the first time I saw him. A man who had every reason to be miserable, but carried something on his face that I had never seen on the face of any billionaire or prince or scholar I had ever met. Peace. Real peace. The kind that does not come from a bank account or a prayer rug or a pilgrimage. The kind that lives in the eyes and cannot be faked. I met him on a Tuesday afternoon in March 2017 at a construction site in King Abdullah Economic City, about an hour north of Jeddah along the coast road. CAC was one of the biggest development projects in Saudi Arabia. Billions of riyals being poured into building an entire city from scratch on the shores of the Red Sea. My company had contracts to supply building materials for several projects in the Industrial Valley section. I rarely visited construction sites personally anymore. I had managers and supervisors who handled the day-to-day operations, But that week I was restless. The emptiness that had consumed me since Omar's death was getting worse, not better. I could not sit still in my office. I could not focus on spreadsheets and contracts. I needed to move, to do something with my hands, even if it was just walking through a site pretending to inspect progress. So I drove out to KAEC with my driver and walked through the site wearing a hard hat and a high visibility vest over my thobe. The sun was brutal. The kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and turns metal surfaces into burning plates. Workers moved slowly in the heat. Most of them were foreign laborers, Bangladeshis, Indians, Pakistanis, Filipinos, men who had left their families thousands of kilometers away to work 12-hour shifts in the Saudi sun for salaries that would be considered insulting in any Western country. I walked past them without looking at their faces. I never looked at their faces. They were labor, resources, line items in a budget. That is how I had always thought about them. That is how most Saudi businessmen thought about them. But that afternoon, something made me stop. I was walking past a row of portable cabins where the workers took their lunch break when I noticed a man sitting alone on a concrete block in the shade of a half-finished wall. He was Filipino, small, thin, dark skin weathered by years of working under the Gulf sun. He was maybe 40 or 45 years old. He wore dusty work clothes and steel-toed boots that were falling apart. His hard hat sat on the ground beside him, and in his hands he held a small book, not a phone, not a magazine, a book. He was reading it with such concentration that he did not notice me standing 10 meters away watching him. There was something about his face that stopped me in my tracks. He was smiling, not a big grin, just a quiet, gentle smile. The kind of smile that comes from somewhere deep inside a person, somewhere that circumstances cannot reach. This man was sitting on a concrete block in 50-degree heat, thousands of kilometers from his family, earning barely enough to survive, and he was smiling like he knew a secret the rest of the world did not. I do not know what compelled me to walk over to him. I was his employer. In Saudi Arabia, the distance between a billionaire businessman and a foreign laborer is wider than the ocean between their countries. We do not sit together. We do not eat together. We do not speak to each other except to give instructions. But something pulled me toward this man like a magnet. I walked over and stood in front of him. He looked up startled and immediately jumped to his feet. He looked frightened. A Filipino worker being approached by a Saudi man in an expensive thobe at a construction site usually meant trouble. He closed the book quickly and held it behind his back. I saw the fear in his eyes, and for the first time in my life, I felt ashamed of the power I carried. Ashamed that my presence made a grown man tremble. I held up my hand and said in English, "Do not be afraid. I just want to talk. Sit down." He hesitated, then sat back down slowly, keeping the book behind his back. I sat down on another concrete block across from him. His eyes went wide. A Saudi boss sitting on a concrete block with a laborer. This had probably never happened to him before. I asked him his name. He said it was Roberto Isguera. He was from a province called Leyte in the Philippines. He had been working in Saudi Arabia for 11 years. Like he had a wife and 4 children back home. He sent most of his salary home every month and kept just enough to buy food and phone credit to call his family once a week. I asked him what he was reading. His face changed. The fear came back. He looked around to make sure no one else was watching. Then he slowly brought the book out from behind his back. It was small, dog-eared. The cover was worn and faded, but I could read the English words on the front. Holy Bible, New Testament. My first instinct was anger. Bibles were illegal in Saudi Arabia. Bringing Christian material into the kingdom was a criminal offense. Foreign workers had been arrested and deported for less. This man was breaking the law on my construction site. I should have taken the book from him and reported him to the site manager. That was my duty as a Saudi Muslim. That was what the law demanded. That was what every sheikh I had ever listened to would have told me to do. But I did not do it. Something stopped me. A voice inside my head that was not my own said, "Listen to him." I looked at Roberto, and instead of demanding he hand over the book, I asked him a question that surprised even me. I said, "What does that book give you that makes you smile like that in this heat on this site, far from your family, earning almost nothing?" Roberto stared at me for a long time. He was trying to figure out if this was a trap, if I was testing him, if the religious police had sent me to catch him. But something in my face must have told him I was sincere, because he slowly relaxed and began to speak. His English was simple but clear. He said, "Sir, I will be honest with you because I believe God sent you to me today. I have been praying for 3 years that God would send someone to talk to, someone who needed to hear what I know. And I believe you are that person." I almost laughed. This laborer who owned nothing thought God had sent me a billionaire to sit on a concrete block and listen to him. It was absurd. But I did not laugh because the look in his eyes was the most serious thing I had ever seen. Roberto told me his story. He said before he came to Saudi Arabia, he was an alcoholic. He beat his wife. He gambled away his earnings. His children were afraid of him. His life was falling apart. One night, his wife, who was a Christian, dragged him to a small church in their village. He did not want to go. He went only because she threatened to leave him if he did not. He sat in the back of that church, angry and resistant. But the pastor spoke about a God who loved broken people, a God who did not wait for you to fix yourself before accepting you, a God who came to earth in human form and died on a cross to pay for every sin you would ever commit. Roberto said when the pastor described the love of Jesus, something inside him broke open. He fell to his knees on the concrete floor of that tiny church and wept like a child. He said, "Jesus, forgive me." And in that moment, he felt something he had never felt in his entire life. Love, not the love of a wife or a mother or a friend. The love of God himself pouring into his chest like warm water filling an empty vessel. He said he stopped drinking that night. He never touched alcohol again. He stopped gambling. He stopped hitting his wife. He became a different man, not through willpower, not through discipline, through the power of Jesus living inside him. I sat on that concrete block listening to this Filipino laborer, and every word he spoke was like a hammer striking a crack in a wall I had built around my heart for 50 years. He was describing something I had never experienced in all my decades of Islamic devotion. He was describing a God who spoke back, a God who changed people from the inside out, a God whose love was not earned but freely given, a God who was not distant and silent but close and personal and alive. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say Islam is the true religion. I wanted to say your prophet Jesus was just a man. But the words died in my mouth because this man sitting in front of me in torn boots and dusty clothes had something I did not have despite all my billions. He had peace. He had joy. He had a relationship with God that was real and personal and transforming. And I had nothing but money and emptiness and a dead sun and a silent heaven. Before I stood up to leave, Roberto looked at me with those calm, steady eyes and said, "Sir, I want to give you something." He opened his Bible to a page he had marked with a folded piece of paper. He tore a small strip from the margin of the page and wrote something on it with a pencil he kept in his shirt pocket. He handed it to me and said, "Read this tonight when you are alone. It is from my God to you." I took the strip of paper and put it in my pocket without reading it. I nodded at Roberto and walked away. I did not say thank you. I did not say goodbye. I just walked away because I was afraid that if I stayed one more minute, I would break down in front of a laborer on my own construction site, and the great Khalid al-Dosari could not allow that. That night, I sat in my bedroom in my villa in the Ubhur district of Jeddah. The house was silent. The Red Sea was black outside my window. The air conditioning hummed. Everything was comfortable and expensive and empty. I reached into the pocket of my thobe and pulled out the strip of paper Roberto had given me. I unfolded it carefully. In small, neat handwriting, he had written a single verse. It said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. I read those words and something cracked inside my chest. The same crack that had been forming since Omar died. The same crack that widened when Lama tried to kill herself. The same crack that deepened when Faisal betrayed me. It cracked wide open, and through it poured a flood of emotion I had been holding back for years. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding that tiny strip of paper, and I wept, because those words described me perfectly. Weary, heavy burdened, exhausted from carrying the weight of a fortune that could buy everything except the one thing I actually needed: rest. And here was a God I had been taught to reject offering me exactly that. Not after death, not in the afterlife, not after I performed enough good deeds to tip the scale in my favor. Now, today, come to me. I will give you rest. I folded the paper and placed it under my pillow. I turned off the light and lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. And for the first time in my life, I whispered a name I had never spoken as a prayer. I whispered Jesus, and the darkness felt less dark. For weeks after that night, I carried Roberto's strip of paper with me everywhere I went. I kept it folded inside my wallet behind my national identification card, where no one would ever think to look. During the day, I went through the motions of my life. Meetings with contractors, phone calls with bankers, dinners with business associates at expensive restaurants on the Corniche in Jeddah. I smiled and shook hands and talked numbers and closed deals. But every night when I was alone, I would take out that strip of paper and read the words again. "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest." Each time I read them, they sank deeper into me like water soaking into dry, cracked earth. I went back to the KAEC construction site twice, hoping to find Roberto. But his supervisor told me he had been transferred to a different project site in Yambu, further up the coast. I did not have a phone number for him. I did not even know his full name beyond what he had told me. He had appeared in my life like a messenger and then vanished. But the message he left behind was doing something inside me that I could not stop and did not want to stop. I started searching for more information about Jesus. This was incredibly dangerous. In Saudi Arabia, searching for Christian content online could trigger alerts from the Communications and Information Technology Commission, which monitored internet activity across the kingdom. Certain websites were blocked. Certain search terms were flagged. I knew this because I had business contacts in the technology sector who had told me about the surveillance systems the government used to track citizens. But I was desperate enough to take the risk. I purchased a VPN service through a foreign account and began searching late at night in my bedroom with the door locked. I found testimonies from people across the Middle East who had encountered Jesus. Muslims from Egypt and Iraq and Syria and Iran and even from Saudi Arabia itself. People who described dreams and visions of a man in white who spoke to them with a love they had never experienced in Islam. I read for hours every night, story after story, testimony after testimony, and they all described the same thing: a God who was not distant, a God who was not silent, a God who came close and spoke and loved and transformed. 3 months after meeting Roberto, I had a business trip to Dubai. This was routine. I traveled to the UAE several times a year for meetings and conferences. My company had partnerships with construction firms in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. I flew from Jeddah to Dubai International Airport and checked into a hotel on Sheikh Zayed Road. My room was on the 47th floor. A penthouse suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Dubai skyline. The Burj Khalifa stood in the distance like a needle piercing the sky. Below me, the city spread out in every direction. Glass towers and highways and shopping malls and artificial islands. A monument to human ambition and wealth. Everything I had worshipped my entire life was on display outside that window. Money made visible. Power made physical. And looking at it all from that height, I felt nothing except a desperate, aching loneliness that no amount of luxury could touch. My meetings ended early that afternoon. My business partners invited me to dinner at a rooftop restaurant, but I declined. I told them I was tired from that flight. The truth was, I could not sit through another evening of small talk and expensive food and conversations about profit margins while my soul was starving. I went back to my suite alone. The sun was setting over the Persian Gulf, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. I stood at the window watching the light change, and I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. Omar's death. Lama's broken eyes staring at me from a hospital bed. Faisal's smile as he admitted stealing from me. The decades of prayers that disappeared into silence. The billions of riyals that brought comfort but never peace. The Quran I had memorized as a child that I could recite perfectly, but that never once made me feel loved. All of it crashed over me at once like a wave, and I could not hold it back anymore. I fell to my knees on the marble floor of that penthouse suite. Not in the controlled, disciplined way I had been taught to prostrate in salat. I collapsed, my legs gave out, and I hit the floor hard. My forehead pressed against the cold marble, and I started crying. Not the quiet, dignified tears of a Saudi businessman. I wailed, I screamed into the floor. Sounds came out of me that I did not recognize. The pain of 50 years erupted from my chest like a volcano that had been sealed shut, finally blowing its top. I pounded the marble with my fists. I grabbed my own hair. I rocked back and forth on my knees like a child in agony. And through the sobs, I started speaking. Not in Arabic, not the formal prayers I had been trained to recite. I spoke in the raw, broken language of a man who had reached the absolute end of himself. I said, I cannot do this anymore. I have nothing left. My money means nothing. My prayers go nowhere. My God does not hear me. I am empty. I am broken. I am dying inside, and no one can see it because I am wearing a thobe that costs 10,000 riyals and driving a car that costs 1 million. But underneath it all, I am a dead man walking. Then I remembered Roberto's words. I remembered the verse on the strip of paper, and I remembered the name I had whispered in the darkness of my bedroom weeks ago. The name that made the darkness feel less dark. I pressed my face into the marble floor and I said it again. Jesus, if you are real, If you are who that man said you are, if you are who those testimonies describe, then I am coming to you right now. I am weary. I am heavy burdened. I have carried this weight my entire life, and I cannot carry it one more step. If you are real, then show me. Show me right now. Because I have nowhere else to go. I have tried everything. I have prayed every prayer. I have given every charity. I have walked around the Kaaba until my feet bled, and I am still empty. So either you are real and you will answer me, or there is no God at all and I am truly alone in this universe. But I cannot live in the middle anymore. I need to know. Tonight. Right now. Show me who you are. I stayed on the floor for a long time after that prayer. My breathing slowed. My tears dried. The room was completely silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. I kept my eyes closed and my forehead pressed against the marble, waiting. I did not know what I was waiting for. A voice, a feeling, a sign, anything. And then it happened. I felt warmth, not the warmth of the heated floor or the Dubai evening, a different kind of warmth. It started in my chest, right in the center, behind my sternum, and spread outward through my body like liquid gold flowing through my veins. It moved down my arms to my fingertips, down my legs to my toes, up my neck to my face. Every cell in my body was being filled with something I had never felt before. It was not just physical warmth. It was love. Pure, overwhelming, all-consuming love. The kind of love that knows everything about you. Every sin, every failure, every selfish thought, every cruel word, every person you hurt, every lie you told, and loves you anyway. Not despite those things, not ignoring those things, but having already paid the price for those things and choosing to love you freely and completely and eternally. I opened my eyes and the room had changed. The suite was filled with light, not the lights from the ceiling or the Dubai skyline outside the window. A different light, a light that had no source I could identify. It was everywhere, soft but intense, warm but piercing. And in the center of the room, standing between me and the window, was a figure, a man. He was dressed in white, not the white of a Saudi thobe or a hospital gown, a white that glowed, a white that was alive. His robe moved slightly as if stirred by a breeze that did not exist in that sealed air-conditioned room. His face. I tried to look at his face, but I could not. It was too bright, like trying to stare at the sun at noon in the Saudi desert. But I could feel his eyes on me, and those eyes held no judgment, no anger, no disappointment, only love. A love so deep and so vast that my mind could not contain it. It spilled over the edges of my understanding and flooded every empty space inside me that I had been trying to fill with money and power and religion for 50 years. He spoke. His voice was unlike any human voice I had ever heard. It was gentle but carried the weight of absolute authority. It was soft but resonated through my entire body, like standing inside a bell when it rings. He spoke in Arabic, my language, the language of my childhood, the language I prayed in and dreamed in and did business in. He said Khalid, just my name. But the way he said it broke me completely. Because in that single word, I heard everything. I heard I know you. I heard I have always known you. I heard I was there when your son died. I heard I was there when your wife lay in that hospital bed. I heard I was there when your friend betrayed you. I heard I was there every night when you stood on your balcony staring at the sea, asking if anyone was listening. I was listening. I have always been listening, and I have been waiting for this moment. Then he said the words that shattered every wall I had ever built around my heart. He said, your wealth was never from Allah. It was from me. I gave it to you. Every riyal, every contract, every deal. It was all from my hand. But I did not give it to you so you could build a kingdom for yourself. I gave it to you for a purpose you have not yet understood. Come to me, Khalid. Stop striving, stop earning, stop performing. Come to me and I will show you what your wealth was always meant for. I lay face down on the marble floor of that penthouse suite, and I surrendered. Every ounce of pride, every shred of resistance, every argument my Islamic training had built into my mind about Jesus being just a prophet and not divine. It all crumbled like a sandcastle hit by a wave. I said through tears that soaked the marble beneath my face, I believe you. I believe you are the Son of God. I believe you died for me. I believe you rose again. Forgive me for all my years of blindness. Forgive me for worshiping money instead of you. Forgive me for ignoring your voice for 50 years. I give you everything, my life, my wealth, my name, everything I am and everything I have. It is yours. Take it. Use it. I am yours. The presence stayed with me for what felt like hours. The warmth did not fade. The light did not dim. I lay on that floor, and for the first time in 50 years, I experienced what Roberto had described. Rest, true rest, not sleep, not relaxation. The deep soul rest of a man who has finally stopped running and fallen into the arms of the one who was chasing him all along. When I finally lifted my head from the floor, the light had faded. The room looked normal again. The Dubai skyline glittered outside the window. The Burj Khalifa stood tall against the night sky. Everything looked the same, but I was not the same. The man who had walked into that hotel suite was dead. The man who stood up from that marble floor was someone entirely new. I walked to the bathroom and looked at my face in the mirror. My eyes were swollen from crying. My thobe was wrinkled and damp with tears. But there was something in my face that had not been there before. The same thing I had seen on Roberto's face that afternoon on the construction site. Peace. I whispered to my reflection the words that sealed my new identity forever. I am a follower of Jesus Christ, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was. I flew back to Jeddah the next morning, and when the plane touched down on Saudi soil, I felt the full weight of what I had done settle onto my shoulders like a concrete slab. I was a follower of Jesus Christ living in the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the birthplace of Islam, the land of the two holy mosques, the country where apostasy from Islam was punishable by death, where there was not a single public church on the entire Arabian Peninsula, where owning a Bible could get a foreign worker deported and a Saudi citizen arrested, where the religious police had the authority to enter your home and search your belongings if they suspected you of practicing any religion other than Islam. I had just given my life to Jesus in a penthouse suite in Dubai, and now I was driving through the streets of Jeddah back to my villa in the Ubur district, knowing that if anyone discovered what had happened to me, I would lose everything, not just my money, not just my business, not just my reputation, my life. For the first few weeks, I lived in a state of constant tension. I went to work every day. I sat in meetings. I signed contracts. I answered phone calls. But inside, I was a different man operating inside the shell of my old life. I still wore my thobe and my shima. I still attended Friday prayers at the mosque because absence would raise immediate suspicion. I stood in the rows with hundreds of other men bowing toward Makkah and reciting words I no longer believed, while my heart was silently talking to Jesus. The hypocrisy of it tortured me. Every time I prostrated in Salat, I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up in the middle of the mosque and declare that I had met the living God and his name was not Allah. But I knew that declaration would be my last. So I stayed silent, I performed, I pretended. And every night when the world was asleep, I locked my bedroom door and fell to my knees and prayed to Jesus in my own words, begging him to guide me through the most dangerous season of my life. I needed a Bible. I needed to understand who Jesus was beyond the single encounter I had experienced. I needed to learn. I needed to grow. But obtaining a Bible in Saudi Arabia was like obtaining a weapon. It required secrecy and connections and a willingness to accept the consequences if you were caught. I remembered something I had read during my late night searches before Dubai. There were underground communities of Christian believers in Saudi Arabia. Not Saudis, foreign workers, Filipinos, Indians, Ethiopians, Eritreans, Koreans, people who had come to the kingdom to work and had brought their faith with them, hidden in their hearts because they could not bring it through customs. They met in secret, in apartments, in labor camps after dark, in storage rooms and basements, and anywhere they could gather without being seen. They worshipped in whispers. They sang in hushed voices. They shared Bibles that had been smuggled into the country inside luggage or mailed in packages disguised as other books. This invisible church existed right beneath the surface of the most Islamic nation on earth, and almost no one knew about it. I began searching for these communities. I started with Roberto. I called the KAEC project office and asked for the personnel records of Filipino workers who had been transferred to the Yambu site. It took 2 weeks of discreet inquiries, but I eventually found Roberto's phone number through a site supervisor who owed me a favor. I called Roberto one evening, and when he heard my voice, he went silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Sir, I have been praying for you every day since we met." I told him what happened in Dubai. I told him about the encounter, about the light, about the voice, about the surrender. Roberto wept on the phone. He said, "Praise Jesus. Praise Jesus." He kept repeating it over and over through his tears. Then he said, "Sir, there are people you need to meet, people who can help you." He gave me the name and phone number of a man named Daniel Tegin. He said Daniel was an Eritrean Christian who had lived in Jeddah for 18 years and led one of the largest underground fellowship groups in the city. Roberto said Daniel could be trusted with my life. I called Daniel that same night. His voice was cautious, guarded. He asked me who gave me his number, and I told him Roberto. He asked me why I was calling, and I told him the truth. I said, "I am a Saudi businessman. I met Jesus 3 weeks ago. I need help. I need a Bible. I need community. I need brothers and sisters who can teach me how to follow Christ in a country that will kill me for believing." There was a long silence. Then Daniel said something that hit me like a thunderbolt. He said, "Brother Khalid, we have been praying for a Saudi believer for years. We have prayed that God would raise up a son of this land who would carry the gospel in his heart. We believe you are the answer to that prayer." He invited me to a gathering the following Friday night at an apartment in the Al Salama district of Jeddah. He gave me the address and the specific knock button to use at the door. 3 quick knocks, then 2 slow ones. He said, "Come alone. Tell no one. Park your car at least 3 streets away and walk. Do not bring your phone because phones can be tracked. Bring nothing that identifies you." That Friday night, I drove to the Al Salama district, parked my car on a side street near the Al Andalus Mall, and walked 6 blocks to a modest apartment building. I climbed 3 flights of stairs to apartment number 304. I stood at the door, my heart pounding louder than the traffic outside, and I knocked. 3 quick, 2 slow. The door opened a crack. A dark face peered out at me. Then the door swung wide and a tall, thin man with a gentle smile pulled me inside. Daniel Tiggin was about 50 years old with graying hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of decades of hardship and faith. Behind him, in a small living room with the curtains drawn tight and blankets hung over the windows to muffle sound, sat about 25 people. Men and women, Filipinos, Indians, Ethiopians, Eritreans, a few Indonesians, one Korean, all of them foreign workers, all of them believers, all of them risking deportation or imprisonment or worse by gathering in this room to worship Jesus Christ on a Friday night in the capital of Islam. They looked at me with wide eyes when I walked in, a Saudi man in an expensive thobe, walking into an underground church meeting. Some of them looked frightened. They thought I might be religious police. Daniel raised his hand and said, "This is Brother Khalid. He's one of us. He's a new believer. He's Saudi, and he needs our help." The room went completely silent. Then a Filipino woman in the front row started crying. She covered her face with her hands and wept. An Ethiopian man next to her began whispering praise God, over and over. Within seconds, the entire room erupted into quiet tears and whispered prayers. These people had been praying for years that a Saudi would come to faith, that someone from this land would join them. And here I was standing in their living room in my designer thobe, with tears running down my face, feeling more at home than I had ever felt in my own villa. Daniel handed me a Bible, a Farsi and Arabic dual-language New Testament that had been smuggled into the country inside a shipment of cookbooks. I held it in my hands and felt the weight of it. Not the physical weight, the spiritual weight. This book was the most dangerous object in Saudi Arabia, more dangerous than a weapon, because a weapon could only kill a body. But this book could transform a soul, and the kingdom of Saudi Arabia was terrified of transformed souls. Over the following months, I attended Daniel's fellowship every Friday night, without fail. I learned to read the Bible. I learned to pray, not the ritual prayers of Islam, but real, honest, raw conversation with a God who listened and responded. I learned about grace and forgiveness, and the cross and the resurrection. I learned that Jesus was not just a prophet, as Islam taught. He was the Son of God, the Word made flesh, the Lamb who was slain before the foundation of the world. Every truth I discovered made the encounter in Dubai make more sense. The light I saw was the light of the world. The voice I heard was the voice of the Good Shepherd. The love I felt was the love that hung on a cross and bled and died and rose again, so that broken, empty men like me could be made whole. I devoured the scriptures like a starving man at a feast. I read the Gospels over and over, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. I read them until the pages were soft and worn, and every word confirmed what I already knew in my spirit. Jesus was real, he was alive, and he had come for me. But I did not just receive from the underground church. I began to give. I realized that the wealth Jesus told me had a purpose was meant for this, for his people, for the invisible church struggling to survive in the most hostile environment on earth. I started funding everything quietly and carefully. I paid the rent on 3 apartments in Jeddah and 2 in Riyadh that were used as meeting places for underground fellowships. I purchased smartphones and loaded them with Arabic and Tagalog and Amharic Bible apps and distributed them to believers through Daniel's network. I arranged for shipments of Bibles to be smuggled into the country, hidden inside containers of building materials that my company imported. Boxes of cement and steel arriving at Jeddah Islamic port with Arabic New Testaments sealed inside waterproof bags buried in the middle of the shipment where customs inspectors would never look. I funded safe houses for foreign workers who had been discovered as Christians and were hiding from their employers or the authorities while arrangements were made to smuggle them out of the country. I set up an emergency fund that could be accessed by any believer in the network who was in danger and needed immediate help. Money for plane tickets, money for bribes at border crossings, money for medical care for workers who had been beaten by employers who discovered their faith. I became the richest beggar in Arabia. A man worth billions on paper who knelt every night on the floor of his bedroom and begged God for wisdom and courage and protection. A man who could buy anything the world offered, but who had discovered that the only thing worth having was a relationship with Jesus Christ. I used to think my wealth defined me, that my net worth was my identity, that the size of my bank account measured my value as a man. But Jesus showed me the truth. My wealth was not mine. It never was. It was His, given to me as a trust, a stewardship, a tool for building something far more valuable than shopping malls and office towers. A kingdom that would never crumble, a church that no government could destroy, a family of believers bound not by blood or nationality, but by the blood of the Lamb who was slain for them. And for the first time in my life, my money had meaning. Every real I spent for the kingdom of God felt more satisfying than every billion I had earned for myself. I was finally using my wealth for the purpose it was always meant for. And the emptiness that had haunted me for decades was gone, completely, permanently. They're replaced by a fullness that no amount of money could buy and no amount of persecution could take away. For 2 years, I lived this double life. The billionaire Saudi businessman by day and the secret follower of Jesus by night. I funded the underground church. I smuggled Bibles. I protected persecuted workers. I worshipped in hidden rooms with believers from 6 different countries. And through it all, I felt the presence of Jesus with me every single moment, guiding me, strengthening me, reminding me that He had a purpose for my life that was bigger than anything I could see. But I also knew the season of secrecy could not last forever. Jesus had told me in that hotel room in Dubai that my wealth had a purpose I had not yet understood. And as the months passed, I began to feel a growing pressure in my spirit, a holy restlessness, a sense that God was preparing me for something, that all the hiding and the secrecy and the double life was just the preparation phase, the warm-up before the real race. I prayed about it constantly. I asked Jesus what He wanted me to do. And every time I prayed, the same answer came back. Speak, tell them, let them hear what I have done for you. Let them know who I am. The idea terrified me. Going public as a Christian convert in Saudi Arabia was not like going public in any other country on earth. There would be no interview on a talk show, no book deal, no speaking tour. There would be an arrest warrant, asset seizure, imprisonment, possibly execution. My family would disown me. My business would be confiscated by the state. My name would be erased from every record as if I had never existed. The Saudi government did not tolerate apostasy. They did not debate it. They did not discuss it. They destroyed it. And they destroyed anyone connected to it. I knew all of this. I had seen what happened to people who crossed the religious red lines in the kingdom. I had heard stories from Daniel about Saudi believers who had been discovered and disappeared, taken from their homes in the middle of the night by the Mabahith, the Saudi secret police, and never seen again. Their families told they had gone abroad, their names removed from civil records as if they had been deleted from existence. But the pressure from the Holy Spirit did not stop. it grew stronger every day. Every time I opened my Bible, I found verses that spoke directly to my situation. Then in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus said, "Whoever acknowledges me before men, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I will deny before my Father in heaven." In the Gospel of Mark, he said, "Whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels." These were not suggestions. They were commands from the King I had pledged my life to, and I could not obey him in secret forever while denying him in public. The time was coming when I would have to choose my comfort or my King, my safety or my Savior, my kingdom of sand and gold or his kingdom that would never end. I knew what I had to choose. I had known it since the night on the marble floor in Dubai. I just needed the courage to do it. The opportunity came in the spring of 2024. I had a legitimate business trip to Bahrain. This was not unusual. I traveled to Bahrain regularly for meetings with investors and partners in the Gulf region. Bahrain was more relaxed than Saudi Arabia. There were churches there, Christian communities that operated openly, foreign workers who could worship without hiding. It was just a short drive across the King Fahd Causeway from the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, but it felt like a different world. I flew from Jeddah to Bahrain and checked into a hotel in the Sif district of Manama. I had arranged through contacts in the underground network to meet with a media organization that recorded and distributed testimonies of persecuted Christians from the Muslim world. They operated from a secure location and it used encrypted channels to protect the identities of their sources. But I told them I did not want protection. I did not want my face blurred. I did not want a fake name. I wanted the world to see me, to hear my real name, to know exactly who I was and where I came from, and what I had to say. The recording took place in a small studio apartment in the Jufair district of Manama. There was a single camera on a tripod, a plain white wall behind me, 2 lights on either side, and a man operating the camera who told me to take as much time as I needed. I sat in a chair facing the lens. I was wearing a simple white thobe, no shimmer, no agal, just a Saudi man sitting in a chair about to destroy his entire life with his own words. I took a deep breath and looked directly into the camera, and I began to speak. I said, "My name is Khalid Al-Dosari. I am a Saudi businessman from Jeddah. For most of my life, I was one of the wealthiest men in the kingdom. I built an empire worth billions of riyals. I prayed 5 times a day. I fasted every Ramadan. I performed Umrah and Hajj. I gave millions in charity. I did everything Islam required of me and more. And I was the emptiest, most miserable man you could imagine. I told them everything. I told them about growing up in the Al-Hamra district, about my father, the merchant, about memorizing the Quran as a boy, about building the business and becoming consumed by wealth, about Omar's death on the Jeddah-Makkah highway, about Lama's suicide attempt, about Faisal's betrayal, about standing on the shoulder of the highway screaming at a silent sky, about Roberto, the Filipino worker, on a concrete block, reading his Bible in 50-degree heat, with a smile on his face that I could not understand, about the strip of paper with the verse that cracked my heart open, about the night in Dubai when I fell on the marble floor of a penthouse suite and cried out to Jesus, and He came in light and glory and spoke my name and told me my wealth was from Him and had a purpose I had not yet understood. I told them about the underground church, about Daniel and the Friday night gatherings, about smuggling Bibles inside cement shipments, about funding safe houses for persecuted workers. about discovering that the most fulfilling thing I had ever done with my money was not building towers or buying cars, but building the kingdom of God in the most hostile territory on earth. And then I said the words that I knew would set the world on fire. I looked into the camera and I said, Jesus Christ is the source of my wealth, not Allah. Every real I have ever earned came from the hand of Jesus. He gave it to me. He blessed me. He prospered me. Not because I deserved it, not because I prayed enough or fasted enough or gave enough charity, but because He loved me. He loved me before I knew Him. He loved me while I was worshiping a God who never spoke back. He loved me while I was ignoring Him and crediting His blessings to a religion that kept me in chains. And when I finally fell on my face and called His name, He answered. In 1 second, He gave me more peace, more joy, more love, more purpose than 50 years of Islam ever gave me. I paused and let the silence hang. Then I continued. I said, I know what this testimony will cost me. I know the Saudi government will freeze my assets. I know they will issue a warrant for my arrest. I know my family will disown me. I know my business will be seized. I know my name will become a curse word in the mouths of sheikhs and muftis across the Arabian Peninsula. I know I may never set foot on Saudi soil again. I know all of this, and I am doing it anyway, because what Jesus gave me is worth more than every real in every bank in the kingdom. You can take my money, you can take my properties, you can take my name and my reputation and my citizenship, but you cannot take what Jesus put inside me. And what He put inside me is worth more than everything I am losing. The video was uploaded through encrypted channels, and within hours it began to spread. First through underground Christian networks in the Gulf, then through Telegram groups and WhatsApp chains across Saudi Arabia, then through Persian and Arabic language Christian media outlets, then through mainstream international news. Within 1 week, the video had been viewed over 15 million times. Saudi state media responded with fury. They called me a traitor and a fabrication. They said the video was produced by Western intelligence agencies to destabilize the kingdom. They said I was mentally ill and had been manipulated by enemies of Islam. My family issued a statement through a lawyer in Riyadh saying I was no longer a member of the Al-Dosari family and that they condemned my apostasy in the strongest possible terms. My assets inside Saudi Arabia were frozen by royal decree. That my companies were placed under government administration. My properties were seized. My bank accounts were locked. In the span of 72 hours, I went from being one of the wealthiest men in the kingdom to having nothing inside the borders of Saudi Arabia. But outside those borders, something extraordinary was happening. Messages began pouring in from across the Arab world, not just from foreign workers or expatriates, from Saudis, from Emiratis, from Kuwaitis, from Qataris, from Bahrainis, from Omanis. Men and women who had been hiding their faith in silence for years, watching my video and weeping and sending me messages, saying I thought I was the only one. I had a dream of Jesus 2 years ago and I told no one. I have been reading the Bible in secret on my phone. I believe, but I am terrified to speak. Your testimony gave me courage. Thank you, Brother Khalid. Thank you for speaking for all of us who cannot speak yet. One message came from a young Saudi man in Riyadh who said he was the son of a prominent sheikh. He said he had encountered Jesus in a dream 6 months ago and had been living in torment ever since. Torn between what he knew was true and what his family and society demanded he believe. He said watching my video was like watching someone open a prison door he thought would never open. He said, I gave my life to Jesus tonight because of you. I'm ready to face whatever comes. Another message came from a woman in the eastern province who said she was the wife of a military officer. She said she had been secretly reading the Gospel of John on her phone for a year. She said she had never told anyone, not her husband, not her mother, not her closest friend. But my testimony broke something open inside her, and she could not stay silent anymore. She said she was ready to believe openly, even if it cost her marriage and her safety. These messages, numbered in the thousands, every single day more arrived. From countries I expected and countries I did not. From Iraq and Jordan and Egypt and Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia and Libya. From Pakistan and Indonesia and Malaysia. Muslims who had encountered Jesus in dreams and visions and had been carrying their faith alone in silence and fear. My testimony had not just opened a door for Saudis, it had opened a door across the entire Muslim world. And through that door, people were pouring in by the thousands. I want to end by speaking directly to everyone watching this. First to the Saudi royal family and the religious establishment. You can freeze my accounts. You can seize my buildings. You can erase my name from your records. But you cannot stop what Jesus is doing in your kingdom. He is appearing in dreams to your sons and daughters. He is whispering his name in the bedrooms of your palaces. He is moving through the labor camps and the construction sites and the shopping malls and the universities, and no amount of surveillance or religious police or death threats can stop him, because he is not a movement you can crush. He is not an organization you can dismantle. He is the living God, and he is coming for Arabia. Second to every Muslim watching this who feels the emptiness I described, who prays 5 times a day and feels nothing, who fasts and gives charity and makes pilgrimage and still lies awake at night wondering if God hears you. I want you to know he does hear you. His name is Jesus. And he is not waiting for you to be good enough or religious enough or worthy enough to come to him. He is reaching for you right now. Do what I did. Fall on your face and call his name. Tell him you are weary. Tell him you are burdened. And ask him to give you rest. He will answer you. He answered me. A greedy, selfish, broken billionaire who had wasted 50 years worshipping money and religion instead of the living God. If he answered me, he will answer anyone. You can take my money, you can take my name, but you cannot take what Jesus gave me. And what he gave me is worth more than every real in the kingdom. If this testimony touched your heart, write in the comments, he is worth more than gold. Let it be a declaration. Let it be a prayer over the Arabian Peninsula and every Muslim nation on earth. Jesus is alive. He is moving. He is calling. And he is worth more than everything this world has to offer. More than gold, more than oil, more than power, more than kingdoms built on sand. He is the rock. And everyone who builds their life on him will never be shaken.